The 1979 Daytona Speedway was remembered for many, many reasons. The first one being Buddy Baker bringing home the inaugural 1979 Busch Clash. It was also iconically remembered for the 1979 Daytona 500, the very first flag-to-flag coverage live on CBS. It was remembered for many reasons. The last lap crash between Donnie Allison and Cale Yarborough. Richard Petty winning his 6th Daytona 500 after going winless in 1978. And a bare-knuckle fist fight between Donnie Allison, Cale Yarborough, and Bobby Allison. It was truly a perfect storm, which made NASCAR the way it is today. Throughout the positivity of how Speed Weeks was remembered in 79, unfortunately, it was tragically remembered for one reason. On February 17th, 1979, the Sportsman 300 took place, one day before the 1979 Daytona 500. This race was only remembered for this horrible crash that began when a car driven by Freddie Smith went into a spin and was struck by a car driven by Joe Franson, which then burst into flames as he hit the wall. Franson was then struck at full speed by Delma Cowart, and there was a race car driver named Don Williams. He was behind Delma Cowart and tried to avoid the pileup. His number 68 Chevrolet Chevelle slammed into the wall and spun into the infield amid a shower of flying debris. Don Williams suffered head and chest injuries as well as a fractured right arm and an aneurysm in the right eye. He was in a coma for 10 years. 10 years later, he sadly passed away. Some people want to know who this Don Williams guy was. And today in this episode of Racing Stories, I will be telling you guys who was Don Williams. Gordon Don Williams was born on May 14, 1947 in Madison, Florida, a small town in the north of Florida near Tallahassee. His parents, Gordon Sr. and Robbie, raised him and his two sisters in a family home near a hardware store Gordon owned. The start of Don's racing career was oddly different from his peers at the time. Don Williams attended college at Florida State University and earned a business degree. His classmates and his fraternity brothers went on to careers in law. A college-educated race car driver is still uncommon now, even more so in the 1970s. His family were not racers and did not approve of his racing. When Don competed in one of the Florida dirt races, he only told his sisters. The family never spoke of his racing, and Don tried to keep it a secret from his parents. He turned a blind eye to it. Quote, "It was never discussed in our home," his mother said. Don was a traveling ball-bearing salesman for a company based in Poughkeepsie, New York, also known as the home of Jocko Muggiacomo. His sales territory was throughout Florida and Georgia, supposedly having girlfriends scattered throughout both states. His traveling lifestyle led him to stay at home with his parents, caring for them as they aged and going to church with them every Sunday morning. He had begun to seem more like the parents and us, the children. His father, Gordon Sr., recalled. Don's mom, Robbie, said, quote, "He always wanted us to travel. He talked us into taking a cruise to Nassau. Did we have a good time? You'd better believe it." The charismatic young man began racing around 1973 on short tracks such as Columbia County Speedway and Volusia County Speedway. He was winning often at those tracks. For a family that didn't discuss racing, his parents did not say anything when trophies kept appearing in his bedroom. He raced dirt tracks and never on tracks over half a mile. But Don Williams still dreamed of racing at Daytona. The way he would do it was in a Sportsman 300 race during Speed Weeks. In early 1979, 31-year-old Don Williams paid $25 and bought a NASCAR license. He bought himself a Chevy Chevelle race car and entered it in what is now the Xfinity Series race the day before the Daytona 500. Don did not tell his parents he was racing at Daytona. They would not approve it and would worry too much. He just told them he was going to Daytona and would be back by Saturday night. On Friday afternoon, a woman at a drugstore told his mother that he qualified. Robbie Williams, his mom, recalled, quote, "Don had said, 'Well, I'll see you Saturday night.' I thought he was going down to Daytona to work. His sales territory covered all of Florida, and I thought he might go to the races as a spectator. On Saturday morning, I went out and got a Jacksonville paper, and there was the start lineup, Don Williams." Robbie called the motel room she knew he was staying at to plead with him not to race, but he was already at the track. That Saturday morning was a tough one for Robbie. Shortly after finding out Don was racing, she got another call from Daytona informing that her brother, A.D. Hewitt, had already passed away at Halifax Hospital. Don had visited him every day for the past few days, but had no way to know his uncle had died when he raced that afternoon. Friends gathered at the Williams home in Madison to grieve with Robbie. Don had never raced on asphalt before coming to Daytona and never raced at a car at such high speeds. He started 38th in a race that began at 1 p.m. And then the crash happened on the fourth lap. On the fourth lap of the 1979 Sportsman 300, a bad crash happened on the backstretch. Joe Franson and Freddie Smith wrecked, leaving Francis' car parked in the middle of the backstretch. Out of control, Delma Coward slammed into Joe Franson, and the car exploded into a terrifying fireball. Flames shot 100 feet into the air, and the black smoke blocked the track. Joe Franson ran from the car unhurt, but it was Don Williams in the back of the field who was injured the worst. A crowd of friends were watching him when the wreck started happening. Don's dirt track car owner, James Colbert, said, "All of a sudden, there was smoke from Don's car. I know he hit his brakes, maybe a little too hard out of inexperience. If he hadn't panicked as much as he did, and I'm guessing, he wouldn't have lost control of the car." With no footage, Don's car presumably wiggled, turned toward the wall, and then turned back away from it, hitting the wall hard with his right rear. The car wasn't badly damaged compared to the other drivers who were in that horrible crash, and it was a mystery why he was bleeding from the ears when safety crews arrived. In fact, it was one of the first cases in NASCAR of vascular skull fracture, something not at all understood in 1979. Presumably, his head snapped to the right upon impact, which caused a major injury to his brainstem. Don's parents received a call shortly after the accident from the Reverend Hal Marchman telling them that Don was hurt badly in an accident. Surrounded by friends, his father Gordon Sr. was the one who answered the phone. Reverend Marchman told him not to bother coming to Daytona. Don would likely be dead by the time they got there. However, his parents left anyway. Gordon keeping the severity from Robbie until they arrived at Daytona. Hours after his uncle had died there, Don was brought to Halifax Hospital, where he was diagnosed with a broken right arm, chest injuries, and head injuries. He was given a 40 to 50% chance of surviving, but he did manage to live. For weeks, the hospital halls were crowded, with his friends praying and hoping together. On Wednesday, March 7, 1979, he was removed from the respirator, able to breathe on his own. Unfortunately, he was still in a coma. At first, there was hope for the family. Don may wake up and the bills would be taken care of. Daytona International Speedway paid for motel rooms and rental cars for the Williams family, and they thought somehow the bills would be paid. Don had gotten the highest level insurance NASCAR offered, $15,000. By the time newspapers told of Donnie and Cale fighting and Richard Petty stealing the Daytona 500, the Williams have gone through all the NASCAR insurance money. A Don Williams Trust Fund was established that got $50,000 in donations. They spent all that pretty soon, too. A few weeks later, after the wreck, a Daytona Speedway official told press members, quote, "All competitors are covered from the time they sign in," end quote. This value statement angered the Williams. As years went on, Don did not get better, and his family did not get the financial help they wanted. They became very bitter. NASCAR officials never contacted his family in any way. Robbie Williams said, quote, "I don't think they care. To know if someone cares would mean a lot," end quote. The Francis refused to be interviewed regarding Don Williams. A few months after the accident, Don's friend Thomas Bishop went to Bill France Jr. hoping that NASCAR would advertise fundraising efforts. Thomas Bishop said, and quote, "He said if we did it for one, we'd have to do it for all of them." He had a copy of the release from liability of NASCAR and the Speedway that Don had signed. After we got downstairs in the lobby, we all commented that we'd never been treated ruder. "I'll never forget Mr. France," end quote. The France family must have viewed Don as an inexperienced driver who just showed up at Daytona International Speedway and got hurt in the race. Why should they pay for his treatments? The Williams never wanted Don racing again, and now the group that put on the race wouldn't help take care of him. It was a tricky situation, and it's hard to say who was right. So basically, it was like a both sides story. Throughout the 1980s, Don lived in a permanent vegetative state, still conscious, but he was not able to move. He remained in his bedroom, surrounded by his racing trophies. He was cared by his parents and the wife of a local pastor. Even with today's medical knowledge, it is unknown exactly what people in Don's condition can understand. Friends hoped he understood nothing, rather than being trapped in his body. He seemed to have some diminished medical capacity, but tragically, it seemed that he was aware of what happened. Robbie asked for a reporter who was standing there, quote, "Don, do you remember what happened to you? Close your eyes tight if you remember. Don, close your eyes tight." The reporter wrote, quote, "He closes his eyes tightly in a way that on a normal face might be followed by a streaming of tears." The Williams became quite angry at the France family for their ambivalence towards Don's condition. NASCAR always maintained their drivers are independent contractors. The distinction means the government does not require NASCAR to offer the same benefits to its drivers as a company would to its employees. For a family that did not like racing to begin with, being left alone with the infant-like son because of racing was terribly difficult. Meanwhile, with the Williams family, his mother would always tell him, quote, "Don, everything is all right. You were racing down at Daytona. You were in an accident. You got a little bump on your head, but everything is going to be all right. That old racetrack business is bad business, isn't it, Don? We found out the hard way." His father, Gordon, always fed him. Sadly, his father passed away in January of 1988, so that means Don wouldn't eat. His mother cared for him by herself until she collapsed from exhaustion in November of 1988. After that, Don was put in a nursery home so others can take care of him. His mother, who was in her 80s at this time, she says in quote, "Don could linger on and on like this, long after I'm dead and gone." And she goes on and says this, "And when you're 80 and you know you haven't gotten much time left, I just pray to God will take him before me. I would miss Don, but I pray that God will take him. It's so hard to stand over him, to stand over your child like that, day after day after day." 10 years and 3 months later, after the horrifying Daytona crash, on May 21st, 1989, Don Williams finally passed away after 10 years trapped in his body. His mother, Robbie, died in 1992. He was buried at the Perry Health Facility in Perry, Florida. Although racing is very fun and exciting and entertaining to watch, there are consequences behind the wheel. You never know if these drivers manage to climb out of the car and see their family and friends again. Don Williams was 42 years old at the time of his passing.